Okay, going live.
All right.
Greetings in the love and in the light of the one infinite creator. I'm Andre, and I'm here today. We're discussing food security and the context of peak oil. Um, okay, so go ahead, Ivor.
No, I
Oh,
I
okay.
was saying hello to John Peach. He's here too.
Oh, yeah, John. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We weren't sure if when you were going to join. You're muted right now. There.
Am I going in? Can you hear me
Yeah.
Yeah,
now?
we can hear you now.
I hear you
Wonderful.
now.
Wonderful. So Ivor had a question. How do we move food around after when in the context of peak oil?
Yep. I guess I could speak if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Speak to your
I
question.
teach kids how to sail on Wednesdays, and other days too. But so I think it could be a useful skill because I think it's going to be, even if it's not, we're not down to absolutely no food and no way to move anything around. We definitely going to have to move things around somehow. And I think if you can get out of the harbor with a little kicker motor of some sort, then you can move thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds with just the wind. And I think that's going to prove to be an unbelievable, advantage if things get short, like, coal and oil. It all seems like it's all getting kind of short together all at once. So I think also there is a system of canals and things, and that system of canals still exists. I know I used to row when I was in college, and we used to row on the Erie Canal. And one of the Erie Canal is now not what you think of as the Erie Canal. It was more like a bargeway, and they'd come into Lake Oneida, one of these big lakes, and then they'd come out the other side, and they'd keep moving things along. But it wasn't. It used to be a little narrow canal, and then they'd bring it up. Now it still exists, and it can get you all the way to Lake Ontario, which is pretty useful. Then from Ontario, you can get through other passageways and things into the rest of the Great Lakes. And so that gives you access to the center of the continent where a lot of things are made, like food,
Yeah.
big time
Yeah.
food. And right now we're seeing what a pinch point it can be if you block a waterway, as in the Russians have not agreed to, it's sort of their only leverage really right now. They have not agreed to let grain shipments go out of the Black Sea. And if you think about the Black Sea, it's surrounded by other countries. And then you have to get through the Bosphorus. Then you have to get through the Mediterranean and out to the rest of the world. So you can see already, we think we're immune to these kind of things. No, the only way to really move large amounts of stuff like grain around is by water. So I kind of think that's going to be a major pinch point. And it always has been. This is the way to move things around, whether sail or whatever you're moving it around. You can't move it all by trains and certainly not trucks and things. So I think we're going to really have to start thinking about how we're going to move our food around, get it from place to place. And I think the Midwest is where a lot of our food is made in the United States, and that's going to require getting through the whole Great Lakes system. So that's my little thing right there. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. The eastern third or so of the United States is actually an island that you can completely loop around the eastern third. So you can go take a boat down the Mississippi, collect grain locally, and then move it to the East Coast if you wanted to.
Yeah, absolutely. And then out the St. Lawrence Seaway, and all around this whole territory. That's why they were fighting for it so much. In the Revolution. That's why, of course, they were fighting for access to the center of the country. That was the most important thing.
So which basins are you talking about there, John?
So if you go through, say, the Great Lakes, get to Chicago, you can go from there down the Mississippi all the way to the Gulf.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, there's actually another, the Tombigbee Big B, I guess it is. Anyway, that will get you down to the Gulf as well. But then you can cut through, and there's even a waterway midway through Florida. You can cut all the way across, or you could go around. And then there's a intercoastal waterway that comes up the East Coast, so you can stop off at any towns or cities along the way there, and go up through New York to the Hudson, and then you go around. People just do this now that they're, just they take their boats and make these year-long trips, but it could be done faster.
Yeah. I'm just trying to get the basin map onto the screen here.
Look up the Great Loop. It'll actually draw it out for you.
Oh, okay. Here, I just have. Oh, could you get an image of it on?
Yeah.
Yeah. Watersheds North America. There. Okay. There.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know if I can zoom in here. Yeah. So if we look over here, there's
Oh yeah.
the Great Lakes Basin is this pink part over here. And then this is the Mississippi Basin. This is the big one. That's most of the U.S., continental U.S. And then I guess you can, over here, this is the Columbia Basin, the yellow part.
Yep.
And so you could get things up, the West Coast, and then up to near Yellowstone National Park over here. And then kind of transfer it over. And then you get in the Mississippi Basin, and then you can get all the way to the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
Or you can kind of travel along here and then route up to the Great Lakes.
Mm-hmm.
And in Canada, we've got the Great Lakes Basin. It drains all the way to the Atlantic. And then we have the Nelson Basin, which is most of the prairies, this blue one. And then there's the Churchill Basin over here, the orange one. And then that connects with both the Columbia Basin and the Mackenzie Basin and the Fraser Basin. And so the Fraser Basin is our kind of the British Columbia. And that would let us go to the Pacific Coast. So if we had a transfer point, actually, like I was looking into it, and just like with the railroad, the Canadian Railroad, we had to do most of the work most of the work we had to do in the British Columbia. And I think that if we were to make a canal system right now, that's probably it's in the Rockies where most of the work would have to be, because it's just like we have like the Hell's Gate, which is like it's an impassable area right now. So you would have to have like some kind of canals to get through there safely. But otherwise, yeah, I was thinking we would also need to have some kind of bylaws that for 100 kilometers in either direction of the main canals, it needs to be trees, like at least 50% tree cover, because you need that tree cover in order to maintain the waterways. If you remove the trees, then all of the water will evaporate and your canal will dry out. And so it's very important to grow those trees to shade the ground, as well as I think Iver, you were saying it was called a hydrodynamic pump or something.
That's the what's it called? Biotic pump. And the idea is that water goes up, off the shore. It comes up and finds its way 100 kilometers in or more, 100 miles in even, and drops where it hits trees. And they found this in a lot of places, especially, all over the place. But I've noticed it also. I live on the coast in the summer here, and you'll see thunderstorms, crazy thunderstorms happen up inland, but they don't really happen here. So all that wetness goes up, finds trees like the whole center of Maine and drops. And they found that when I used to live in Central America, there was an old Mayan guy, and he said, they're cutting too many trees, and trees call the water. So I sort of thought at first, I was like, yeah, right, trees call the water. But as it turns out, a place like the Amazon rainforest and different rainforests have enormous amounts of humidity up above them. And that does kind of capture the clouds. And then the rain falls there. So it creates this sort of little microclimate where the water comes up off of the ocean and drops right where the trees are. And it'll skip over a place if there aren't trees. So it's very important to keep, especially, every culture has made this mistake of cutting over the highlands around the civilization. So you want to keep those highlands forested because that's where the water comes from that keeps the place going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And also the leaves capture the dew and the fog, and in the morning, and then it like drips off, and then you get extra kind of rainfall. Like I know every time I wake up in my hammock and get out in the morning, everything is wet. It doesn't matter if it rained the night before. It's because of the dew, and it's collected because thanks to the trees, and the trees create shade that prevents that dew from evaporating as soon as the sun rises, so it has time to get into the soil. And so, like, even when my neighbors who mow their lawn, even when their lawns are like totally dry and crispy, mine are lush and green, and I've got all my plants are growing even without watering, because they have the good shade, and they're collecting the dew. It's a healthy ecosystem.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. It creates a sort of a microclimate of wet, and it stays a lot longer. I noticed on this island here, it can get very dry in the summer. And the interesting thing is the parts of the lawn that get a little shade actually stay much greener, which is sort of surprising because, you think, okay, the lawn needs sun. It does need sun up to a point, but then once it gets dry and, it goes away, you need to have some little spot to sort of a little microclimate to keep it all green.
Mm-hmm.
And but this year, of course, it doesn't matter. It's been raining like mad every day. In fact, it's raining too much. Mm-hmm. You used to be able to sort of have to water it all, but no.
And that's also a good thing with forests is and I found a website on the Biotic Pump here. I'll just share it just for the benefit of our viewers. Okay. And so when you have trees, and they have they create a good soil, and in that, when the rain falls, it is captured by that good soil. Because if you have if you have no trees, then usually the soil compacts, and then you have what's called hard pan, and then the water falls and it just rolls right off. It doesn't get into the soil. But when you have trees there for a while, then the roots they fluff up the soil, and so when the rain falls, it goes into the soil, and so and then the trees suck it up into their bodies, and the plants suck it up, and then like the old wood logs suck it up, and there's lots of things sucking up all of this water, and that prevents erosion, as well as reduces floods and things like that. And so that's another good reason for having trees. And of course, if you grow trees that produce food, then you're also helping with the food security aspect, like nuts, acorns. Like if we were going with that example with the pea shrubs, with the prairies or the Nelson Basin that I was showing earlier. So over here, it's fairly dry in this area, um, and so that there's not a whole lot they can grow there in terms of trees. Right now, it's called the prairies, right? Because it's or the plains in this part over here in North America. But you can grow trees there. You can. It's just right now most of it's clear cut, and then it's just growing corn, which is depleting the soil. But you can grow pea shrubs, and you can grow pine trees. There's a lot, and cactuses. There's lots of different trees you can grow, and even bur oak that will produce food, and they will also give those biotic pump benefits.
Notice that
Talking
first step on there, the coming off the ocean or off the water, evaporation. Yeah. Have you seen the temperatures around Florida and the Gulf of Mexico?
Insane.
Oh yeah. That's mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's one of the things they were saying with climate change is that it's going to increase rainfall in places that are wet and decrease rainfall in places that are dry.
Yeah.
And the reason for this is that when the air is hotter, it can hold more water.
Right.
And so the areas that are getting rain, the areas that have trees are getting the benefits of all the rain, and the places that don't have trees, it's just evaporating and it's not coming back down.
Because Vermont would think of it as so much of a benefit at this point.
Oh, well, Vermont is where it's crazy, but I think that's also because if you've ever been to Montpelier, Vermont, and the way that Vermont structures their roads, they go right along the rivers. And so Montpelier is kind of like a granite, there it was the granite capital, or, marble capital and things. And so it's kind of, they channelize the river right in the middle of town. And so once it gets up out of that channel, it just spreads right out.
Mm.
And so Montpelier got hit with a 1,000-year flood the other day. And then just 11 days later now, they got hit by another, 1,000-year flood or something. I mean, I don't know if they said that yet, but, basically this shouldn't happen. And then 11 days later, it happened again.
Right.
So it's just the way the world is. I have a friend who lives in Western Maine, and her lake was 15 inches above what it's ever been before. So it washed out everybody's docks and things, and it just changed everything. And they say the lake is much warmer than it normally is because of all this rain and stuff. And I know the offshore buoys in Maine in April and May were 3 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than they normally are. And that's before it even started warming up. So you think about it, there's a lot more Gulf Stream water coming in, and it's just generally kind of heating up. And of course, that leads to more, evaporation, more pickup of water. And of course, they can go right inland and dump on things.
So I have a question here from a YouTube listener. Annie Bjorkman asks, my question is, should I buy a farm?
I think you want to think about where you're going to buy it.
Yeah, that's true. So, well, but based on the name, I would assume this is in Scandinavian country.
Scandinavian countries are probably pretty good because, here in Maine, they did a stupid thing that the state said, okay, why don't we just spread waste on farms? So they said it's perfectly safe. They let everybody spread this waste, and now it's called PFAS contamination. And so all these people who have like even organic farms or whatever found out they can't feed any of the food to people anymore. So I think check that kind of thing out. But they can't drink their water and they can't feed to people. But anyway, I think check the farm out. But in Scandinavia, there's been a lot of people moving out of those rural areas for a long time. And I think you might be able to find something that's pretty good,
Yeah. I think that it's also important to note that there's a minimum size in order to grow enough food and firewood to feed your family. And I know where I am, it's hardiness zone 5. And so we have 5 months of summer and or 5 months where the temperature is above 10, the average temperature is above 10 degrees Celsius, and that's enough to grow trees. And so you need 3 acres per person here, and so that's 1.2 hectares. And then if you are like, say you have 4 months of summer, then I made like a little I think it was so yeah, 1.2. So if you need 1.5 hectares if you have 4 months of summer, and 2 hectares per person if you have 3 months of summer. And you can't deal with anything less than 3 months of summer because it just isn't enough for almost anything to grow unless you do greenhouses. And that's not really a viable option for food production. So 2 hectares is 5 acres per person. And then we're talking about, these are farms where most of your food, including your protein, is coming from plants. Because if we were doing animals, it would be about 10 times more that you would need, because of like animals eat the food, eat your plant food. But you can do some animals that can eat, like, say, your food waste. Like in North America, we have the opossum, which is kind of they have a very small brain, so they don't, and they can also eat garbage, and what do you call it? They can eat rotting food, and so they're very good in that respect. They have a good and they produce very prolifically, and so reproduce, and so they have a very good food to meat ratio. Well, feed conversion ratio, I think that's what it's called. Chickens also have a good feed conversion ratio. And so you could do those if they can, like, peck in your forest, if you can manage to prevent them from getting eaten, is the biggest problem around here. So that's why opossums and like, native animals, I find, are an easier bet, like ruffed grouse and things like that. Like, they eat hazelnut catkins, and so if you have a healthy ecosystem, say for instance you have hazelnuts, which would work in Europe as well as in North America, then you would need to have, like, well, where I live, you need to have at least a quarter hectare, which is about an acre, um, of one crop, or, well, it doesn't have to be a single crop, of just for food production for 1 year.
Yep.
So if we break that down with that 1.2 hectares, I do have a diagram somewhere on it. Here, if I can find it. But basically, here it is, hectare breakdown. Here, I'm going to share screen just to make this a little easier to describe. Hectare breakdown. There we go. So if we look at this hectare breakdown, we have the core food. So this is for an ideal piece of land that has 6 months of summer, right? Yep. So 6 months of 10 degrees average temperatures. So they would only need 1 hectare per person. So the core food would be here, this quarter hectare, and it would produce 5 to 7 gigajoules of energy, which is enough to feed 175 kilo moderately active male. But this is in an average year. And as it usually goes, is that you're going to have like 2 boom years in every 5 years. You'll have 2 boom years and 3 not so good years. And so on average it'll be enough, but if in those years that it's not, you want to have this backup food section here, and then in the good years you'll be able to sell this surplus to the people that are having bad years, for example. And so the backup food, so if, say for instance, you just bought the land, you just bought yourself your hectare of land, what do? What do you do? Well, first of all, you should identify what plants you already have that are useful there, so you don't chop them down. But once you've identified, okay, I've got an area that I can clear, or that is already clear, I can plant my core food. And because you need to feed yourself in that first year, you can do corn, beans, and squash, or some other kind of sustainable annual just to get started. And then in your backup food, you're going to plant some perennials that are going to give you food soon, but maybe not this year, but maybe next year. Like you could plant what do you call it? Apios americana or Helianthus tuberosus, like biennials, like carrots and things like that. But you can also plant shrubs like hazelnuts, and you can plant hazelnuts and berries, and then you also need your wood. Oh, I hear some feedback coming from one of our people here.
We try. I'll mute mine.
Mute. Yeah. Okay. So the core wood. So this is willow short rotation coppice, because you also need, like, especially if you're in a temperate climate, you're going to need to heat your home in the winter. And so in order to do that, you're going to need to have wood. And so the easiest way of doing that is using coppice wood. Now, this is a method that was developed both in the UK and in Japan, because they were very limited in their land. And so they quickly managed to eradicate most of their forests. And then they were like, well, what do we do now? How do we heat our homes? And so they found that if you keep a piece of wood or a tree in a young state, then it will grow very vigorously and very quickly, and in the first few years. So say, for instance, with willow, you can grow it 3 to 5 years, and then you can chop it down to the bottom, and then it will just regrow from the bottom. Now, if you have a lot of like deer and rabbits and things like that that are going to munch on those willow roots, then what you can do is pollarding instead. So that's where you let it grow, and then at when it's above browse height, above where the rabbits or the deer can get it, and then you chop it there, and that way the bark has enough chance to get thick enough that the deer and the rabbits won't be able to chew through it. And so you're going to be harvesting at that height. And another an important thing to understand with coppicing and pollarding, that you can't just go to an existing tree and then chop it off and then expect it to work, because the issue is if there's heartwood. So if you chop it off and you see heartwood, which is like, it's usually like a darker kind of wood in the center, there's no sap going through that, and so it is very prone to being infected by mold. So if you do go that route where you want to create pollards in your existing thing, you're going to need to do something to cover up that whole the heartwood, so that it doesn't get infected by fungus. But usually what the more typical route with pollarding is that you grow it, and then once it gets to that height, you cut it while it's all still sapwood under there, and then it's going to like create a callus, and then it's going to grow out of that, and then you just cut it at that point to just always make sure that you're only cutting through the sapwood and you don't allow the heartwood to form. Because once the heartwood forms, then it becomes, you might kill the tree by cutting it. It might not grow back. But some trees also grow back from the bottom. And so that could be a viable option as well. And then those shoots that go from the bottom, you could pollard or coppice those. Anyways. So I'm gonna see
on your chart over here, the core food. So I'm wondering whether you might have to have more of the backup as climate changes. And I don't know whether you've seen it, but there was a article about how food growing regions may be hit simultaneously by climate change effects because of the way the jet stream sort of meanders around, and the very good growing areas kind of get hit by the same meander at the same time. And so worldwide, there may be food shortages.
Yeah. It's you may want to have more of a backup, and I mean that's I guess it's a both a personal choice and how you do it. Here, I'm gonna try and get back to this Hector breakdown. Um, and so um, but another thing you can do is that in your woodlot, you can grow actual food trees as well. Like you don't have to do short rotation willow. You could grow ironwood, or you can grow walnuts, or you can grow hazelnuts. I mean really for wood, if you're going for wood, like hazelnuts have been used for wood and things like that. So they could be producing food, and another, you could reduce the amount of space that you need for your short rotation coppice. So one of the YouTube video listeners here mentioned the that you could use poplar and black locust, and that is good for dry. If you have like a drier area, then yeah, poplar and black locust, or poplar and honey locust. So honey locust will actually produce edible beans for you in a significant quantity, whereas black locust, I mean, while it's theoretically the beans are edible, but they're really tiny, and like the pods are really tiny. It's not really quite worth the effort. But if you do honey locust, they have huge pods. The pods are edible. They have the pulp tastes like honey, and then they have big beans, and so you could use those, and then that will be a food source as well. And that's a nitrogen fixer. Now, in wetter areas like Vermont or something like that, then you would want to go with a willow and alder coppice. So willow, but there's no food value to them, unfortunately. The willow does give you, what do you call it? Aspirin.
Honey locust also was used as fence posts. You can split it even, like you take a small size honey locust like this big, and you can actually even split it 4 times, and it becomes a very nice, long-lasting fence post. It was always used. I mean, here in New England, they always used cedar, but in New York State, you always use the honey locust as a fence post. Yeah. And they actually, you can just plunk them right in the ground and they start growing. But
wow,
but we did a sort of a food forest for 20 years. We had a maple syrup operation, and also, of course, that was our home wood area too. And then we harvested it a couple of times for saw logs and pulp and different things. And we began to realize the first time you cut, you have to get rid of sort of the junky stuff, the stuff you don't want, popple, different stuff like that. And popples, we had enormous popple. So when we cut the popple, they fall over and all their limbs kind of fall off, which is nice. And then you drag it out. It's a lot of weight, and that's used for pulp and things. But another thing about it is here in Maine, we have something called tree growth. And this can be a big boon to people who have woods, because if you have 10 acres or more of woods, you could turn it into tree growth, and then you get much lower taxes. Even if you live in a fairly populated part of the county, whatever county you're in, it gets counted as a hardwood or a softwood lot in that county. So way up in the north part of the county might be undeveloped, etc., and the land values are much lower. So you get taxed much lower with tree growth. So it makes sense for, if you're going to have a piece of land here in Maine, it really makes sense to have a piece of woodland. Having a hayfield or something like that is not as great. I mean, unless you already have it, because the problem is, then you need a $25,000 machine to harvest the hay and to do different things. So it really makes sense to have in Maine, the number one crop has always been woods, has been logs and woods and things. So you kind of get used to that. And I used to tell my young students, buy the most hammered, cut over woodlot you can find, because you have time. If you're 18 years old, you can afford to grab a piece of land that, you know, isn't doing anything right now, and you can cut off many, you know, like what is it? It's a half a cord per acre per year. Doesn't hurt the woods at all. So you can afford to cut, you know, little stump sprouts and things you don't want, and you're improving the woodlot every year. And then in 20 years or so, you could do a cut and you can actually make a little money off of it, which will pay the taxes and things. So, you know, you're making your home heating every year. You know, as a young person, you could make your home heating every year, and you could pay, you know, probably pay the taxes if you're willing to cut enough firewood and stuff. And then in 20 years, you're going to have a cut that actually has some value to it. And we did it for 20 years. And, you know, I hate to say it, but at the end of it, we actually had some big oak and different things, and we just sold them in order to, you know, pay the taxes and pay what our expenses and things. And it actually paid for it. But I mean, they were, you know, I hated to cut those big oaks, but, you know, you end up with sort of a choice. You know, you're sort of making the forest work to keep your business going. And of course, we sold maple syrup every year, and mushrooms. We, you know, had shiitake mushrooms, and we even tried ginseng and different things on the lot. So, you know, it actually worked out. You know, after 20 years of doing it, it actually worked out as a very good thing for an average person to have a piece of woodland. But, you know, I mean, I certainly don't want to have a big giant farm with lots of hay fields and things, because I just don't have what do? I don't get anything out of that that's really that useful to me, unless you have a bunch of horses and things. But you definitely, as an average person, you can definitely use firewood, edible mushrooms, exercise. Maybe, you know, we actually cut a bunch of, there wasn't off of our lot, but we cut a bunch of white pine, milled it into timber, which is really nice. White pine becomes very nice building material. And then we use that with board and batten to build our maple sugar house. So it's a really useful thing to have a piece of woodland, and especially recommended to young people if they can get it together. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about because the other breakdown I had, it looked like it was on the corner, and so, but the actual organization I feel would be better like this, where you have your core food in the middle and like your house in the middle, and then around it you've got your food forest. And then this way, even if you do some tilling in the middle, it's going to run off into your food forest, and it'll be captured by your food forest, so you're not going to be losing your soil overall. And then also your food forest, the leaves will shed, and then, you know, they can be integrated into your soil here in the middle. And then and then you have your wood coppice around it. And so, yeah, so someone was mentioning chestnuts. Chestnuts are good also in dry areas like that. That's another thing you could grow in that Waterton Basin, or sorry, the Nelson Basin and the Plains area. You could grow chestnuts and pine nuts and pea shrubs and all of those woodland cactuses, and they'll all produce food for many generations. And then I also wanted to show different screen here. So about if you're more than one person, here, Irish Block Village, there we go. And so over here you can see the this is kind of just a prototype village based on pre-industrial villages. Pre-industrial villages often had these little villages with these little houses, and then they were kind of in a circle, and this was for defense reasons. And then is because like if there's like raiders or things like that who come and they try to steal your food, you're better off being in a group. And now all of these little squares, each one of these little squares is a 3-acre lot, and so each villager has their own kind of like 3-acre lot that they're kind of responsible for, and then they can either do it themselves or they can get one of the other community members to manage it for them. And this way your community knows if you're living within the carrying capacity. And so each one of these, I think there's 14 little houses, and that's enough for I think like 60 or 56 people or something like that. So 50 to 60 people is the optimal group size for a community, and for social cohesion, and in terms of economies of scale. Because if you get too large a group, if it's over 150, for instance, you start to get into a diseconomies of scale where you're kind of you're spending more on overhead and enforcement, whereas when you got a group of 50 to 60, that's the ideal. And it's also the size of a average church congregation, and so you could worship together, and that can also help with social cohesion. And what the Amish do is they hold church, so even if you're not co-located and you have like one house, like every, like say you got like 4 of these squares is enough for one family, and then in the middle you've got a little house. Okay, so what, or if you got like a row of 4, and then like every row of 4 has got its own little house. And then the Amish, what they do is they have church at a different person's house every week. And so the whole community comes over to your house, and if you need your barn lifted, or if you need to dig a massive ditch or something, like everybody knows where you live, and like they come over to your house every week, or every year, or at least once a year. And so they have some incentive to help you out and make sure that your whole home is in order, so that also gives you that community cohesion. And this particular lot, this is just a regular rural block. And then another feature is that you see this red border over here. It's only 30 meters, but I think maybe even 50 meters would be better. And it is just the plan is to have like thorny shrubs, like thorny honey locust, osage orange, roses, raspberries, rose hips, and all of that. And the idea there is to create a barrier to prevent bandits and things like that, and people trying to come and take your food. um, because I read historically that one of the reasons that Britain did so well is because, and Japan did so well, is because they didn't have to worry about invaders because of the geographical difficulty of people coming to invade them. So they didn't have to spend a huge amount of income or on maintaining a standing army and then having all of these wars that they had to do in Europe. So by having this thorny kind of border, so you start with like say roses and raspberries. They're about 3 meters tall, and they've got some spikes that will dissuade a lot of people. And then the next stage, you've got sea buckthorn and hawthorn, and now they're 6 meters tall. And so you can't jump over them. And they've got more serious spikes. And they're even harder to get through. And then next, you've got 12 meters high. You've got the Osage orange. Osage orange are nature's barbed wire fence. They are the hardest wood that grows in North America, and you are not getting through that. Even if you had like a saw, it makes chainsaws dull. when that's how hard it is. Like your chainsaw will go dull trying to go through an Osage orange, and you're going to have to resharpen it, and then with after peak oil, people aren't going to really even have chainsaws. They're going to have to go with manual hand saws, so you're going to be manual hand sawing. Everyone's going to hear it, and then they can just get their bows and arrows or whatever. And then the next stage, you've got your thorny honey locust. Now, thorny honey locust, I'm going to try to get an image up of those, and they have thorns that are here. I'll get the share screen so that our video people can see. So they are 30 centimeters long, and you can see they branch off to the sides as well. And I can get an image there. There we go. So you see, these are very, very gnarly thorns, and they are also a very kind of hard wood, and so you basically would need a tank or something to get through one of these. If you had like a cluster of them growing side by side, they're not going to be easy to get through. And another thing is, because they grow so long, is that you can use them as darts for a crossbow. And then that way, you have like a defensive perimeter, and you have a nearly endless source of ammo as well, to keep your community safe. And then you don't have to actually spend that much time doing it. Yeah. All right. So I don't know if you guys had any comments on that. Or any more questions on food security or sustainable transition?
No, I agree with your thinking. Defense is going to be important, but I also think you're going to have to figure out a way to trade a little bit.
Oh yeah, for sure.
There will have to be trade, and I read about a community that had the plague back in the day, and what they did is they made a deal with a local landowner. They said, big landowner nearby, they said, listen, we're going to go to a spot, and we're not going to let anybody out of the village. Everybody's going to stay in the village, but we're going to have a spot that we're going to trade. We're going to have you drop off stuff. And so they did that for a long time. So I think that's maybe going to be sort of almost a model where, you drop off, you sort of meet the other people at a certain point, and you drop off something, and then you have a medium of exchange of some sort, and people move things around because, I can't think of a time when there hasn't been some sort of trade. There's been in North America, you're going to have to do some sort of trade.
For sure. For sure. And that's a good point. So if we go back to this diagram I got here, so you see all of these little villages. Now the traditional way, like we were saying, is connected through the water system. So around this is the road, the highway, and that's kind of like, that's what you're defending against, is the highway people. Because that's kind of like an open road, and anybody can go on there. And now internally, though, there is the water system here, which I guess you could also you might want to have, like, if things are really bad, have like a sentry or something on these points. But otherwise, you have a path to go through your entire basin here. So, and then you can have basin based basically trading network. So you can trade inside your village. Now inside your village, that's probably like 50 to 60 people. You're probably just gonna give it away, because like this is pretty much your family, or your church, like you're just helping those. Now in the diagram you can see there's multiple villages, and so those villages they can all they can trade together. So you could have one person go to another village and be like, hey, we need XYZ, or they could have like, once a month or something, we're going to meet at one of these villages and we're going to have a little trade get together. And now so you can also scale that up to neighborhoods. And so here I got this particular basin. I'm gonna try to share this. The Waterton Basin, and it's called screenshot. And there it is. Okay, so if we look at this basin over here, then you can see there is like it's not very big. So this is a neighborhood, and the one we were looking at was Irish Block 24 over here, and so there's several blocks, and then you could have a market up near the mouth for everybody inside the neighborhood. So all of these 7 blocks or whatever, and then the for this whole basin, and then you could have another market down in Owen Sound for kind of the municipal or the larger kind of basin region. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So that's what I wanted to share there. And so that's to answer that question related to the markets. And I go to Katy Market, and so farmer market in our area, and it's also a big one. So kind of getting that all connected.
Oh yeah, I think getting the farmers markets going now is a very good idea. Because I think you have these places for people to meet. Even now, when we have all sorts of trading and things, you think about all that big stuff might break. That whole system might break, kind of. And so when that system goes, it's nice to have another system almost in place. Not obviously you can't feed everybody with the farmers markets as they are now, but at least you have a system already for people to move things around and trade things. Like I know we have a farmers market here in our town, well, in Skowhegan, and it's a really good thing.
Yeah, and I bike to my farmers market, so even in a post-collapse scenario where we don't have any resources or whatever, I'll still be able to bike there.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, and we've got Anabaptist, like Amish people, that they come there by horse and buggy. And so, like we can maintain those farmers markets, especially in rural areas where you could, have enough room for a horse and buggy and all those kinds of things.
I think it's going to be crucial.
Yeah.
We're not going to have, you think about it, as it slowly goes, these big food webs are going to kind of fall away or be in trouble in different ways. I mean, especially the idea of, these giant food processors, etc. They're having a harder and harder time keeping up.
Yeah. And we won't really, have the fuel for them. What I read is that basically even a famine, there's always food in the stores. It's just not everybody can afford it.
Yeah.
and the amount of people who can't afford it is slowly rising. So people so like when people say, oh, there's still food in the stores, there's no famine, that's not necessarily true. It's like famine is dependent on, do you have people that can't afford food? Then you're in a famine situation, and if it's the majority, then your country is in a state of famine.
Yeah, they have.
The rich are always going to be able to afford it.
Right. Have you ever heard of Giffen goods? The idea is that eventually people can't afford things and they stop buying them, right? But there are some things that you absolutely need to buy, like food, for example, some certain things of food. So there is no upper limit to the amount that you're going to be willing to pay for it, because you have to pay for it. And if you can't, okay, that's too bad, you're out. So in the Irish potato farm, and they called them Giffen goods, everybody's sort of competing for this one potato or something. And meanwhile, there was all this food being exported out of Ireland, like, cash crops. But everybody used to eat the potatoes and things. So when they went away, then the whole culture sort of fell apart. And then all these people were no good because they didn't need the people to, farm the land. So they started shipping them to, they had a free ride to Canada, right? Mm-hmm. And so they would come into, have you ever seen Gros Isle, which is on the St. Lawrence? It's like you can take a boat over there, and it was the Ellis Island of Canada. Anyway, you would go in there, and then they'd determine whether or not the people were too sick, and they'd let them go on to Quebec City or wherever, and they'd get a free ride into Canada, and then they would try to sneak into the United States, and they'd come into Jackman in northern Maine and different places, and they would try to get in and go down to Boston and places, the Irish. So this is the 1840s.
Yeah, that's a good point, Iver. Like, a lot of it has to do with management and how the government manages things, because like I read this book about famines in the 17 and 1800s, and they were showing how like there was like a famine in the 1700s in China, and like it was like brutal in terms of like the food production collapse, but because it was very well managed, the government opened the granaries almost right away to let the poor people have the food. And they were also transporting food from the south of the country where there was no famine to the north of the country where there was a famine. And so there was very good flow, and it was very well managed. And now contrast this to like there was an 1800s famine that was managed by the British in India. And it was a complete disaster. Because the British were extremely hard-hearted and cruel. Like, they didn't care about the Indian people in the slightest. And this was exactly the same problem with the Irish. They didn't care about them in the slightest. So they they had like this very anti-charity stance. They didn't want to give anything to anybody for free. And so they made forced labor camps. So these people that are too weak to work because they're dying of starvation, they're like, no, you will need to break rocks and do forced labor if you want to have any food. And so only the men were even capable of doing the forced labor. And like the ones that somehow managed to get enough nutrients at that point. And so they were dying from overwork and things like that. And the British completely refused to give anybody free food. And so I think 14 million people died. But at the same time frame, they exported enough food to feed 16 million people.
Yeah.
Because they wanted that money in order to fund the Boer War in South Africa. So because they wanted to kill more people in South Africa. It's like, that's their excuse. It's like, oh, we need to kill more people, so we're not going to let our people live. And so anyway, so managing it is a very crucial aspect. And then raising that amount of forgiveness and compassion and love for each other in our lives is one of those things, because like our leaders can only do that which the lower echelons think is acceptable. Like if like in America, I know it has inherited a lot of that really hard-hearted culture where they're like, no, we can't feed the poor, let them die of starvation and things like that. And it's like they're always cutting the food stamps, and like people are supposed to live on $12 a month now or something like that in America. Yeah. That's the food stamps. It's like that's not charity. That's death, for most people. And so so a lot of it has to do with if we go into this hard time with the peak oil, we're going to run out of food per se. We're not necessarily going to run out of food. That's the thing. If we manage this well with compassion and kindness and land distribution, where people can grow their own food and their own firewood, there is a way we can maintain population and everybody will have food. But that would require a lot of raising of compassion and love for each other in order to get that going up into the, talk to your local city, municipal and council level and all those things. in order to get it to work, at least at the local regional level, because it's unlikely we're going to be able to transform it to go to the national and international levels. But if it does, hey, anything's possible, but we got to start somewhere.
Yeah, I agree. I think working on food networks now is a good idea because you get an idea. I mean, there are people who are food insecure now in Maine for sure, in different places, and you kind of got to start working on ways of making it work, even before we have a major crisis. And I read that book too, Andre, and they had the Indians and the Chinese both had a system where they would distribute out of these major granaries, and they would take those granaries and they'd feed people all over the country and stuff. And then in came the British, and they said, we've got to monetize all this stuff. It's all got to get to a port and go someplace. And which is a great idea as long as you, can feed people back there, Mm-hmm. So the monetizing thing is like what we're doing now. And I think that in the Midwest, even a lot of those granaries are not full. They take it out and it becomes part of the world market. So everything's got to get to market.
Yeah. Well, we only have 30 seconds left now.
Yep.
So I'm going to have to close it off. So, but it was great talking, and we'll have another one next month or something. Okay.
Thank you.
So we leave you in the love and in the light of the one infinite creator. Go forth, therefore, rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one infinite creator. Adonai.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thanks. That was great.
All right.
Get an idea of what we're going to do.